This isn't your typical snooze-fest history lesson. No, it's a tale of a guy who lived a double life so extreme it seems straight out of a Hollywood script. We'll cover everything from the fateful morning of February 21st, 1994, when everything unraveled, to his early days as a CIA officer who never quite fit the mold. So, grab a coffee, sit back, and let's get into the real-life drama of betrayal, cash, and downright absurdity. On the morning of February 21st, 1994, Aldrich Ames started his day in Arlington, Virginia. It was President's Day, a holiday most people would spend sleeping in or having brunch. But not Ames. He was called into the CIA headquarters in Langley for an urgent briefing before his scheduled trip to Moscow. As he pulled out of his driveway in his Jaguar, a symbol of his carefully maintained double life, everything went sideways. The cars ahead of him weren't moving. Suddenly, two cars closed in from behind, trapping his car. Within moments, armed FBI agents surrounded him. This wasn't a setup for a pleasant chat. It was the moment the law finally caught up with one of the most notorious traitors in American intelligence. Before all the chaos, Aldrich Ames was just another CIA officer, or so it seemed. In the early 1980s, while stationed in Mexico City, his job was to recruit Soviet intelligence officers, turning them into assets for the CIA. But instead of turning his Soviet counterparts into informants, Ames started forming unlikely friendships. He would spend hours, sometimes as many as 17, drinking with his targets. One such a friend was Igor Shurigin, a high-ranking KGB counterintelligence officer. These long, drunken sessions weren't just about sharing a few drinks, they were the seeds of betrayal. Ames grew disillusioned with the Cold War rhetoric. Instead of seeing the Soviets as the evil empire everyone warned about, he began to view them more like a bunch of buddies who, like him, were just trying to get by. And as his personal life started to crumble with a bitter divorce and financial woes, his descent into double-dealing had already begun. As the years passed, Ames's double life became more elaborate and more lucrative. With a modest CIA salary of around $69,000 a year, you'd think he'd live modestly. Not Ames. He started buying luxuries, a fancy Jaguar, upscale dinners, even a house in Arlington. How did he afford all this? He set up Swiss bank accounts, cleverly registering them in his mother-in-law's name to hide his newfound wealth. Meanwhile, he was secretly selling top-secret information to the Soviets for cash. Every illicit transaction and every lavish expense only deepened the mystery. Colleagues wondered how one man could spend like a millionaire on a government salary, and the answer was simple: Ames wasn't playing by the rules at all. By the mid-80s, the whispers of Ames's betrayal started turning into alarm bells. Investigators noticed patterns in his spending, huge cash deposits that had no explanation. His financial records looked more like a crime scene than a regular budget. The CIA, preoccupied with other political scandals, failed to connect the dots immediately. Meanwhile, Ames continued to work, even being promoted to run the Soviet division of the counterintelligence group, while simultaneously selling secrets to the enemy. It was as if he was playing both sides of a game that no one else even knew was happening. Things took a dramatic turn when the FBI and CIA finally began to suspect something was off. Undercover agents started tailing Ames, disguised as joggers, strollers, and even elderly citizens. His routine began to be dissected in minute detail. They discovered that he'd been using dead drops, prearranged meeting spots where he would leave classified documents. Imagine walking past a mailbox on a quiet street, only to find it marked with chalk, signaling that secret packages were waiting there. Ames even had separate spots for receiving cash. It was a system that worked until it started to unravel, like a badly knitted sweater coming apart stitch by stitch. On that fateful February morning, everything came crashing down. As Ames was being boxed in on the road, his double life was exposed in a matter of seconds. Surrounded by FBI agents, he was taken into custody far from home, designed to prevent him from destroying evidence. The arrest was swift and in many ways anticlimactic. Imagine being so engrossed in your own world that you never suspect your car has become a trap. In the ensuing chaos, Ames's carefully constructed life began to crumble. The truth was finally out, and his betrayal had severe consequences for countless Soviet agents who'd trusted him. His actions led to the exposure and, in many cases, the execution of double agents. The fallout was massive, shaking the foundations of the CIA and forever altering the course of Cold War espionage. After the arrest, the mole hunting machine roared into action. Investigators combed through Ames's financial records and discovered deposits that could only come from illicit dealings. They questioned everything, from his extravagant spending habits to the bizarre way he managed his bank accounts. Polygraph tests, which many would say are as reliable as a coin flip, strangely didn't expose his lies, at least not in the way anyone expected. Even when Ames was asked about his contacts and the sources of his money, he managed to deflect with astonishing ease. The investigation was messy, full of missteps, delays, and a lot of red tape. For years, the intelligence community struggled to grasp the full extent of the betrayal, while Ames himself continued to climb the corporate ladder unbeknownst to his colleagues. It might sound unbelievable, but despite all the red flags, Ames kept getting promoted. He was eventually made the head of the Soviet branch of the counterintelligence group. His superiors, blinded by the CIA's culture of secrecy and compartmentalized information, were completely in the dark about his personal failings and his double dealing. It was a case of the wrong man in the right place, and every promotion only gave him more access to the secrets he was selling. His rise was as ironic as it was tragic, a traitor rewarded with more responsibility, all while the wheels of betrayal spun faster than ever. Ames's personal life was a cocktail of excess. His drinking habits were legendary. He'd often get so intoxicated that he couldn't even answer simple questions. There were stories of him being pulled over in Mexico City, too drunk to speak. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was a glimmer of normality, or so it seemed. He started dating Rosario, a Colombian cultural attaché, and together they built a life that, on the surface, looked like any high roller's dream. But behind closed doors, the contradictions piled up: lavish spending, mounting debts, and a growing sense of entitlement that would eventually lead him to betray everything he was supposed to protect. As the 1980s turned into the 1990s, cracks began to appear. The CIA's network of Soviet informants started to vanish, and the whispers of betrayal turned into a full-scale investigation. The mole hunting team, led by veteran investigators, started scrutinizing every expense, every cash deposit, and every suspicious detail in Ames's financial records. The evidence was piling up, but for a long time it seemed like the agency was too busy with other scandals to take decisive action. Yet the trail was unmistakable. Every large withdrawal, every inexplicable cash deposit pointed to a man living a life far beyond his means. By the early 1990s, the FBI and CIA were on high alert. Agents were tailing Ames around the clock. They watched him on the streets, followed him into restaurants, and even inspected his trash. Yes, his trash, for any clue. It was a bizarre scene. Undercover agents disguised as joggers, shoppers, and even grannies were all part of this intense surveillance. The investigations uncovered dead drops marked by chalk on mailboxes, secret meeting spots in public parks, and a labyrinth of transactions that made no sense for a man on a modest salary. The net was closing in, and every little detail brought the investigators closer to unveiling the traitor within. Then came the day of reckoning. Ames was scheduled to leave for Moscow, and the pressure was mounting. The FBI, in coordination with the CIA, planned a sting operation to catch him in the act. They wiretapped his phone, bugged his home, and monitored every move. On that fateful morning of February 21, 1994, while Ames was on his way to a meeting about urgent intelligence, the trap was sprung. As his car slowed, agents closed in. His world, built on deception and double standards, collapsed in an instant. The arrest was swift, efficient, and in many ways anticlimactic, if you consider that a man who had managed to cheat his own agency for years was now facing the full weight of the law. In the aftermath of his arrest, the investigation took center stage. Every minute detail of Ames's life was dissected. His bank records, his personal correspondence, even his social media-like interactions, if you can call them that in the pre-digital era, were scrutinized. The CIA finally realized the extent of his betrayal. As investigators pieced together the evidence, the picture became horrifyingly clear. Ames had not only compromised national security, he had also destroyed lives. Soviet agents who had trusted him were exposed, and many paid the ultimate price. It was a betrayal that shook the agency to its core. One would think that a spy caught red-handed would fail a polygraph test, right? Well, not in Ames's case. The polygraph, a tool known as much for its drama as for its inaccuracy, failed to catch his deception. Despite clear signs of stress and inconsistencies in his answers, Ames managed to charm or outwit the examiners. Bureaucracy and a culture of need to know meant that crucial details were kept hidden, and the polygraph tests never really painted the full picture. It was a bureaucratic mess that allowed him to continue his betrayal for far too long. Even as suspicion grew, Ames's career kept advancing. In a baffling twist, the same man who was undermining the agency was being rewarded with promotions and greater responsibilities. He was given access to the very secrets he was selling, and his superiors, kept in the dark by layers of secrecy, remained blissfully unaware. It's ironic, really, a traitor who managed to climb the ladder of power while simultaneously working against it. His rise was a dark comedy of errors that only deepened the shock when his betrayal was finally exposed. Ames's personal life was as chaotic as his professional one. His spending was extravagant, his parties legendary, and his drinking bouts infamous. Picture a man who, despite a modest government salary, could afford a Jaguar, fine dining, and a swanky Arlington home, all because of secret cash injections from the Soviets. His lifestyle was a blend of high-rolling excess and low-life behavior, a cocktail of indulgence that ultimately fueled his downfall. It was a life where every lavish dinner and every expensive suit only hinted at the dark secret behind the cash. The true impact of Ames's betrayal wasn't just measured in dollars, it was measured in lives. His espionage led to the exposure of numerous Soviet assets working for the CIA, many of whom were executed. Families were shattered, careers ruined, and trust in the intelligence community took a massive hit. It wasn't just a case of one man's greed, it was a systemic failure that reverberated through the corridors of power. The fallout was as severe as it was tragic, leaving scars that are still felt in intelligence circles today. As the noose tightened around him, Ames's final days were a mix of defiance and resignation. The day of his arrest saw him boxed in on the road, a dramatic end to a life spent in shadows. In the ensuing interrogation and debriefings, Ames's nonchalant attitude and disturbing calm were on full display. Despite the gravity of his actions, he seemed almost detached, as if his double life was nothing more than a series of unfortunate events. His arrest marked not only the end of his career, but also the collapse of an elaborate web of deception that had long undermined national security. Looking back, Ames's story is a cautionary tale of how personal weakness, be it greed, alcoholism, or a misplaced sense of camaraderie, can lead to catastrophic betrayal. It forces us to ask tough questions. How do systems fail to catch the signs? And how can someone who seems so ordinary on the outside harbor such dangerous secrets? It's a story that reveals not just the inner workings of espionage, but the very human flaws that drive us all to make mistakes. In the years that followed, the intelligence community was forced to reckon with the fallout of Ames's actions. New protocols were put in place and trust had to be rebuilt from the ground up. The story of Aldrich Ames remains one of the most profound examples of betrayal in modern history, a reminder that even in the most secretive corners of government, human nature can lead to unexpected and disastrous outcomes. His case has been studied, dissected, and remembered as a turning point in how intelligence agencies operate today. If you enjoyed this narrative, consider sharing it with friends who appreciate a good story of real-life intrigue and the absurdity of human nature.